The cafe buzzed with conversation, the scent of coffee thick in the air, but the moment Sarah walked in, everything else faded. Her left hand was raised just enough to catch the light, making sure everyone could see the ring, my grandmother's ring. She slid into the seat across from me, her smirk as polished as the diamond she flaunted. "Thanks for meeting me, Emma," she said, her voice coated in artificial sweetness. "I wanted you to be the first to know. Michael and I are getting married." My stomach clenched at the name of my ex-husband, but I kept my expression unreadable. Sarah had been doing this since we were kids, taking what was mine, whether it was a childhood toy, a prom date, or now, the man I once loved, but this time, she had taken more than I could ignore. "Congratulations," I said, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup to steady them. "I see you're wearing Grandmother Rose's ring." She held up her hand, twisting her fingers so the antique diamond caught the light. "Oh, this?" She let out a mock laugh. "Well, since Michael helped me contest the will, it's legally mine now, along with the house and the trust fund." Her grin widened. "It's funny how things work out, isn't it?" Funny, that was one word for it. I thought of Grandmother Rose in her study, just days before she passed, her frail hand pressing an old leather journal into mine. "Keep this safe," she had whispered, urgency laced in her weak voice. "Everything you need to know is in here. Wait for the right moment." I had promised her. I had tucked the journal away, unread, but last night, curiosity and desperation won. And now, watching Sarah gloat, I knew, this was the moment Grandmother had been waiting for. Sarah stirred her latte with exaggerated ease. "You know what's really funny?" she mused. "How easy it was to convince the lawyers you were unstable. A few teary statements from Michael about your episodes during your marriage, some carefully edited photos." She shrugged. "The judge practically handed everything over." I gritted my teeth. The episodes she spoke of were panic attacks I had suffered after discovering Michael's affairs. Affairs, I now realized, that included my own sister. "Why did you ask me here, Sarah?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Just to gloat?" "Oh no, dear sister," she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I wanted to offer you a deal. Sign away any future claims to the estate, and I'll give you a monthly allowance, just enough to keep you from completely falling apart." She smiled, leaning back, satisfied. "After all, we are family." I studied her, feeling the weight of the journal in my bag. "You're right," I murmured, reaching for it. "We are family, and there's something you should know about Grandmother's estate." Her expression tightened. "What are you talking about?" "We've been through all the paperwork. Everything is in my name now." I placed the journal on the table, its leather cover worn with time. "Not everything. Did you know Grandmother kept a second set of books?" Sarah's smirk wavered. "What?" "She documented everything, every transaction, every property, every investment, including some rather interesting transfers made just before she passed." Sarah's fingers curled around her cup. "You're lying." I slid a stack of papers across the table, copies of the most critical pages. "According to this, Grandmother moved her most valuable assets into a separate trust, one that requires both of us to agree on any distributions." Her face paled as she skimmed the documents, her breath coming shorter. That's impossible." "Michael checked everything." "Michael doesn't know about this," I interrupted. "Neither do the lawyers. Grandmother made sure of that. She was waiting to see how far you'd go." "You're bluffing," Sarah said, but her voice had lost its edge. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had memorized. "Let's ask Mr. Chin. He's the trustee Grandmother appointed. I'm sure he'd love to verify everything." Sarah's composure cracked. "Wait," she hissed, reaching for my phone. Let's discuss this." I ended the call before it connected, watching the realization dawn in her eyes. "Oh, now you want to talk?" I raised an eyebrow. "What happened to all that confidence?" "Emma, please," she whispered, her voice thin, desperate. "You don't understand. Michael and we've already spent some of the money. We have commitments." I stood, gathering my things. "I understand perfectly. You and Michael stole my inheritance by painting me as unstable. You used my trust against me, like you always have." Her lips parted, her confidence unraveling. "What do you want?" I hesitated, studying her. For the first time in years, I truly saw her, not just as the sister who had always taken, but as someone who was finally afraid. "What I want," I said quietly, "is for you to think about what happens when Michael realizes there's no money left to steal. That marrying you won't give him access to Grandmother's fortune after all." Sarah went still, the color draining from her face. You wouldn't, she whispered. I tilted my head. Wouldn't I? Her lips trembled. If he finds out, he'll leave me. Probably, I agreed, not looking back as I walked away. Funny how history repeats itself, isn't it? As I stepped out into the cold morning air, I could feel Sarah's gaze burning into my back. I could almost hear her mind racing, scrambling for a way out of the trap. But this time, she had nothing left to steal. She had set the trap for herself. But this time, there was no escape. This time, justice would finally be served. The next morning, I woke to 37 missed calls and dozens of frantic messages from both Sarah and Michael. I ignored them all. Their desperation no longer concerned me. I had bigger plans. Grandmother's journal had revealed more than just the secret trust. It had shown me exactly how to dismantle the lies they had built. With the leather journal secured in my bag, I drove to the law offices of Chen Associates. Mr. Chen, a small man with steel-gray hair and wise eyes, greeted me warmly as I entered his office. Miss Emma, he said, rising from behind his desk, your grandmother spoke of you often. She would be proud of you today. I placed the journal in front of him. Did she tell you what they might try to do? His expression darkened. Rose was very perceptive. She knew your sister's nature, and she had concerns about your ex-husband even before the divorce. That's why she created the second trust? Precisely. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Everything of real value, the investment portfolios, the commercial properties, the art collection, it's all here, protected. What Sarah and Michael managed to steal through the courts was a facade, a shell with nothing inside. I thought back to Sarah's smug face at the café, Michael's cool confidence as he testified against me. They don't know they've been playing with an empty hand this whole time. Mr. Chen nodded, a glint of amusement in his eyes. No, and now that they've exposed themselves, we can move forward with the rest of Rose's plan. My phone buzzed again. Michael. This time, I silenced it without looking. How long before they realize? I asked. The quarterly statements go out next week. Once they try to access the accounts, he spread his hands. Let's just say the revelation will be dramatic. For the next few days, I stayed busy while Sarah and Michael's messages grew increasingly frantic. I met with bankers, real estate agents, and investment advisors, uncovering layer after layer of grandmother's foresight. She hadn't just protected her assets, she had laid a meticulous trap, one designed to expose every deception Sarah and Michael had woven against me. On Friday afternoon, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Emma? It was Michael's mother, Margaret. Please, we need to talk. Sarah's hysterical, and Michael won't tell me what's going on. I closed my eyes, recalling how Margaret had stood in court, her voice steady as she testified against me. There's always been something off about that girl, she had said. I'm sorry, Margaret, I said, not feeling sorry at all. I think they can explain it to you themselves. I'm sure they have plenty to say about how they stole my inheritance. But the money, she started, her voice taut with worry. They've already spent so much. The new house, the cars, the engagement party next week. Emma, surely we can work something out. I thought about the engagement party. It was set to take place at the same country club where Michael and I had been married 6 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. You know what's funny, Margaret? I said lightly. When Michael and I were married, you told me that family was everything, that loyalty and honesty were the foundation of a lasting relationship. A heavy pause. I wonder how you'll feel when you learn how your son and my sister betrayed those values. Silence stretched on the other end. Then, finally, what do you mean? I let the moment hang before delivering the final blow. Ask them about the photos they doctored, the false testimony, the fabricated evidence they used to paint me as unstable. I took a slow breath. Better yet, ask them about the affair they were having while Michael and I were still married. Her sharp inhale was answer enough. No, she whispered, they wouldn't. They did. I let the truth settle, then added, and now they're about to learn what it means to face the consequences of their choices. I ended the call and drove to grandmother's house, my house now, though Sarah didn't know that yet. The Grand Victorian loomed in the golden light of late afternoon, its windows reflecting the sky. I stepped inside, inhaling the familiar scent of old books and polished wood. The study remained untouched, grandmother's reading glasses still resting beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. I traced my fingers along the spines of her beloved books. I wish you could see this, I murmured into the stillness. A notification flashed across my screen, a message from Mr. Chen. Quarterly statements sent. Expect contact within 24 hours. I smiled, settling into grandmother's favorite chair. The wait wouldn't be long now. Then, as expected, a car screeched to a halt outside, doors slammed, footsteps thundered up the porch. Emma. Sarah's voice, shrill, panicked. Open this door right now, we need to talk. I stayed where I was, listening as Michael's voice joined hers, thick with disbelief. The accounts are empty, everything's gone, how could this happen? I stood, walking slowly to the door but leaving it closed. Nothing's gone, I said, just loud enough for them to hear. It was never there to begin with. Silence, then Sarah's voice, quieter, pleading now. What are you talking about? Maybe you should ask your fiancé about due diligence, I suggested, about checking the real value of what you thought you were stealing before spending money you didn't have. More hurried whispers. I imagined them standing there, their perfect world collapsing piece by piece. Emma, please, Michael tried next, his voice smooth, coaxing, the same tone he had once used to convince me of his lies. Let's talk this through, we can work something out. I tilted my head, considering. Like we discussed things when you were sleeping with my sister? I asked. Or when you stood in court and lied about my mental health? He hesitated. That was a mistake. We never meant for it to go this far, Sarah added quickly. I laughed softly. You never meant to get caught, I corrected. You never thought you'd have to face the consequences. Silence. Well, I said, savoring the weight of this moment, too bad, because that's exactly what's about to happen. And just like that, the cracks in their world became an avalanche. I sat in grandmother's study, watching through the window as Sarah and Michael argued on the front lawn. Sarah's hands flailed wildly, her perfect makeup streaked with tears, while Michael paced in agitated circles, raking his fingers through his hair. Their world was crumbling, and for the first time, they had no one to blame but themselves. My phone buzzed, a message from Mr. Chen. The bank has requested an immediate meeting regarding the recent expenditures. Shall I arrange it? I typed back one word, yes. The next morning, I arrived at the downtown branch of First National Bank, dressed in one of grandmother's vintage Chanel suits, a silent tribute to the woman who had orchestrated this reckoning long before she was gone. Inside the conference room, Sarah, Michael, their lawyer, and Margaret were already seated. They turned as I entered, their faces a mix of fury, fear, and desperation. Now that everyone's here, the bank manager began, clearing his throat. We need to address the irregular activities on these accounts. Sarah's lawyer leaned forward, his expression carefully composed. My clients were granted access to these funds through a court order. Everything was done legally. I placed grandmother's journal on the table. The court order, I said, my voice steady, was obtained through fraud, and we can prove it. The room fell into a tense silence. For the next hour, Mr. Chen methodically laid out the evidence, the doctored photographs, the false testimony, the carefully fabricated case that had painted me as unstable, the manipulations that had allowed Sarah and Michael to steal what they thought was grandmother's fortune. The real estate holdings, the investments, the trust itself, Mr. Chen concluded, were never part of the assets they controlled. The money they'd been spending was essentially credit, the bank manager finished grimly, based on collateral they never actually owned. Michael went pale. But the money, it was in the accounts. We saw it. No, I said simply, you saw what grandmother wanted you to see. Sarah shot to her feet, slamming her manicured hands on the table. This is ridiculous. Emma's just doing this to punish us, because she's bitter. Michael chose me, and she can't handle it. I studied her, really studied her, and for the first time, I didn't see the polished, confident woman she pretended to be. I saw a desperate, hollow person, someone who had spent her life taking instead of building, clinging to the illusion of power she had never truly possessed. No, Sarah, I said quietly, this isn't about bitterness, it's about accountability. Grandmother saw you for who you really were, she planned for this. Margaret, silent until now, turned to me. What do you mean? I flipped open the journal to a marked page. This is grandmother's real will. Everything of value was placed in a trust before she died, protected by specific conditions. I met Sarah's eyes. She knew you would try to take it all, so she waited. She wanted to see how far you'd go. Michael exhaled sharply, shaking his head. And now what? You're just going to leave us with nothing? No, I said, sliding a document across the table. I'm going to do what grandmother would have wanted. The trust will cover your debts, but only if you both sign this confession, admitting to your fraud and manipulation. Sarah's lawyer bristled. And if they don't? Then the bank moves forward with fraud charges, Mr. Chen answered smoothly, and all of this becomes very, very public. Silence. Margaret was the first to speak. Sign it, she said flatly, turning to Michael. Sign it and be grateful Emma has more mercy than either of you deserve. One by one, they signed. Sarah's hand shook so badly she could barely form the letters of her name. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. When it was done, Mr. Chen gathered the documents and nodded. There's one more thing, I said, standing, the ring. Sarah instinctively covered her left hand, gripping the diamond like a lifeline. It was grandmother's, I reminded her. It was never yours to take. Her jaw tightened, but after a long moment, she pulled it off and set it on the table. I picked it up, feeling its weight, the history it carried. Grandmother once told me this ring wasn't just about its worth, I murmured. It was about legacy, about the kind of person you choose to be. Neither Sarah nor Michael spoke. I turned and left, my heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving them to face the ruins of their own making. The drive home was quiet. The late afternoon sun bathed the city in gold, casting long shadows across the streets. When I reached grandmother's house, my house, I went straight to the study, settling into her favorite chair. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, just as she had always said it would. On her desk, beside an unfinished crossword puzzle, I noticed an envelope. My breath caught as I picked it up. Inside, in her familiar handwriting, was a note. My dearest Emma. If you're reading this, then everything has played out as I expected. Remember, true wealth isn't in what you own, but in who you choose to be. You've proven yourself worthy of not just my inheritance, but my legacy. Wear the ring with pride, knowing that you faced adversity with grace and emerged stronger. And one day, when the time is right, pass these lessons on to someone who needs them as much as you once did. With all my love. Grandmother rose. I sat there as the sun set, letting her words settle deep in my bones. Sarah and Michael would recover. Eventually, the trust would ensure they weren't left destitute, but they would never again have power over me. Months later, I heard they had moved to another state. Their engagement had quietly ended. Margaret sent a Christmas card, thanking me for handling things with more grace than they deserved. Sarah never reached out again, and that was fine. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as ashes. The house became my sanctuary, filled with grandmother's books and memories. I started a foundation in her name, funding scholarships for young women fighting to build something for themselves. And the ring? I wear it every day. A reminder that true victory isn't in taking what others have, but in becoming someone they can never diminish. Grandmother knew that all along. She just waited for me to learn it, too.